Hidden deep in America is a town the government quietly erased forever. Families lived here for generations, until one day, everything suddenly changed. The government arrived with offers people couldn't refuse, but didn't fully understand. One by one, homes were sold, and neighbors began quietly disappearing. But the real reason behind this mass buyout was never clearly explained, and what happened here would remain one of America's strangest untold stories. This was the town of Seneca, once full of life, now almost forgotten. Located in a quiet rural region, it looked like any other peaceful community. People knew each other, shared meals, and built lives over decades here. Nothing about this place suggested it would soon vanish without a trace. The story began during a time when America was changing rapidly. The Cold War had created fear, and the government needed new strategic land. Quiet rural areas suddenly became valuable for secret operations and testing grounds, and towns like this were now standing in the way of bigger plans. At first, residents noticed small, unusual changes happening around them. Strangers appeared, asking questions, studying land, and taking quiet notes. Then came official letters, offering to buy homes at surprisingly high prices. Some residents accepted quickly, believing it was an opportunity they couldn't ignore. Others hesitated, unsure why their peaceful town was suddenly so important. But the offers kept coming, and pressure slowly began to build. Soon, entire streets were being emptied as more families decided to leave. Each departure made the town quieter and far more unsettling than before. Schools closed, shops shut down, and daily life began disappearing completely. Even the town's busiest places slowly turned into empty, forgotten spaces. But the real story is even stranger than just people moving away. Residents were not just leaving, they were being systematically relocated elsewhere, and once they left, they were rarely allowed to return again. The land was quickly secured, restricted, and placed under strict control. Soon, the town no longer existed on maps the way it once had. Few people outside the area even realized an entire community had vanished. What happened next surprised even those who had agreed to leave. The government began transforming the area into something entirely different. Massive infrastructure replaced homes, fields, and everything people once knew. Some say it became a military testing zone hidden from the public eye. Others believe it was used for classified research projects, never fully revealed. But official records remained limited, leaving behind more questions than answers. Former residents shared stories, but many details never matched official explanations. Some claimed they were pressured harder than others to leave quickly. Others said they were never fully told why their land was needed. And that mystery still surrounds the story to this very day. Over time, nature slowly began reclaiming what remained of the abandoned town. Roads cracked, buildings decayed, and memories faded along with the structures. What was once a thriving community became a silent, empty landscape. But beneath the surface, the land still served a purpose few understood. Access remained restricted, and the area stayed heavily monitored for years. Even today, parts of the land are not open to the public. Visitors who try to get close are quickly turned away without explanation, and that secrecy continues to fuel speculation about what really happened here. Some believe dangerous experiments may have taken place beneath the surface. Others think it was simply a strategic decision during a tense historical moment, but the lack of clear answers keeps the mystery alive even decades later. Former residents still remember the day everything changed forever. They recall the confusion, the uncertainty, and the sudden loss of home. For many, it wasn't just property, it was generations of memories erased. And while compensation was offered, it never replaced what was truly lost. Today, only fragments remain of the town that once stood here. Faint outlines of roads and structures hint at what used to exist. But without context, most people would never know a town was here. The story faded quietly, overshadowed by larger events in history. But for those who lived through it, the memory never truly disappeared. Stories like this reveal a side of history rarely discussed or fully understood. Places can disappear, but the questions they leave behind often remain forever. Why was this town truly cleared, and what was considered so important? Was it national security, hidden research, or something never meant to be revealed? The truth may exist somewhere, but it has never been fully confirmed, and perhaps that uncertainty is what keeps this story so haunting, because it reminds us how quickly ordinary life can be unexpectedly erased. Entire communities can vanish quietly without most people ever noticing, and sometimes those disappearances are far more deliberate than they seem. Even now, the land holds secrets buried beneath years of silence. What remains is not just empty space, but a story waiting to be remembered. A story of people, homes, and a town that once felt permanent, until it became one of the many places history quietly left behind. And perhaps one day the full truth will finally come to light. Until then, the mystery of this town continues to quietly linger. Long after the town disappeared, its story continued quietly through scattered memories. Former residents carried pieces of the town with them wherever they went. Stories were passed down, but details often changed with each retelling. And over time, truth and speculation became difficult to separate. But one thing remained certain: the town had been deliberately erased. In recent years, interest in the story has slowly begun to grow again. Historians and journalists started revisiting the case, searching for missing answers. They uncovered fragments, but nothing that fully explained the government's actions. Some records suggested strategic importance tied to national defense priorities. Others hinted at projects that were never publicly disclosed or acknowledged. The deeper they looked, the more complicated the story seemed to become, because every answer uncovered seemed to raise even more questions, and no single explanation could fully account for everything that happened here. Meanwhile, the physical site remained mostly untouched by the outside world. Time moved forward, but the land seemed frozen in its own quiet past. Occasionally, explorers attempt to document what remains of the forgotten town, but access restrictions often limit how much they can truly uncover, and those limitations only add to the mystery surrounding the location. Because when access is denied, curiosity often grows even stronger, and this story continues to attract attention from those seeking hidden truths. It stands as a reminder that not all history is fully visible. Some stories remain buried, either by time or by deliberate design, and uncovering them often requires patience, persistence, and unanswered questions. Because sometimes the absence of information is the biggest clue of all. And in places like this, silence can speak louder than any explanation. Even now, decades later, the land holds an unsettling sense of quiet tension. Nothing appears unusual at first glance, But something feels undeniably off. The absence of life itself becomes the most noticeable detail. No children playing, no lights in windows, no signs of human activity, just silence, stretching across land that once echoed with everyday life. For some, that silence feels natural, like time simply moved on, but for others it feels deliberate, as if something was intentionally removed. And that feeling continues to draw people back to this forgotten place. Even without clear answers, the mystery remains deeply compelling. Because stories like this challenge what we think we know about history. They remind us that not every decision is fully explained to the public, and sometimes entire communities become part of decisions made far above them. Decisions that reshape landscapes and lives in ways that can't be reversed. For the people who once lived here, the impact was permanent. Their homes may be gone, but their connection to this place remains. And in quiet moments, that connection can still be deeply felt. Because places are more than locations. They are part of people's identity. And when a place disappears, part of that identity disappears with it. That loss cannot be measured in money or explained in simple terms. It exists quietly in memories, stories, and unanswered questions. As years passed, the story slowly slipped further into the background of history. New generations grew up without ever knowing a town once existed here. To them, it was just land, quiet, open, and seemingly untouched. But beneath the surface, the past remained carefully buried, and occasionally small clues would resurface in unexpected ways. A piece of foundation, a road fragment, or a forgotten artifact. Each discovery offered a brief glimpse into what once stood here, but never enough to fully reconstruct the town's complete story, because too much had been removed or intentionally left undocumented, and without records, even the truth can slowly begin to fade. Yet some people refused to let the story disappear completely. They dedicated years to uncovering even the smallest remaining details, piecing together fragments from interviews, archives, and personal accounts, slowly building a narrative that had almost been lost entirely. But even their work could not answer every question left behind, because some parts of the story may never be fully revealed, whether due to time, secrecy, or deliberate silence. And that uncertainty continues to define the legacy of this place. It is not just a story of a town, but a story of unanswered history. A reminder that not everything is preserved the way we expect. Some stories are rewritten, while others quietly disappear altogether. And this town exists somewhere in between those two realities, not completely forgotten, but never fully remembered either. And that may be what makes its story so powerful today, because it forces us to question how much we truly know, not just about this place, but about history as a whole, because what we see is often only part of a much larger story, and what remains unseen can sometimes be far more significant. This town is one of those hidden stories, quiet but deeply impactful, a place that no longer exists, yet still leaves a lasting impression. Even now, the story continues to echo quietly through time, not through headlines, but through the silence left behind, a silence that feels heavier the longer you stay, because it carries the weight of everything that once existed here, and everything that was suddenly taken away without clear explanation. It's a reminder of how quickly normal life can be interrupted, and how fragile even the most stable communities can be. because stability is often more temporary than it appears, and decisions made far away can reshape entire lives overnight, often without those affected fully understanding why. That lack of understanding is what makes this story so unsettling, because uncertainty often lingers longer than any clear answer, and in this case, that uncertainty has lasted for generations, passed down not as facts, but as fragments of memory, each piece incomplete, yet still deeply meaningful. Together they form a story that refuses to be forgotten. Even without complete answers, its impact is undeniable, because what happened here was real, and it changed real lives, lives that were forced to move forward without looking back, even though part of them remained tied to this place forever. And that connection continues to give the land its quiet significance, because even empty places can carry powerful meaning, and sometimes they tell the most important stories of all, stories not written in books, but felt through absence and remembered through the silence that remains behind. Long after everything disappeared, the land remained exactly where it always was, unchanged on the surface, yet completely different beneath. A place that looks ordinary, but carries an extraordinary past. And that contrast is what makes it so deeply unsettling, because nothing about it immediately reveals what really happened here. There are no signs, no markers, no reminders left behind, just silence, stretching further than most people expect. And in that silence, the story continues to quietly exist, not as something visible, but as something felt, because places like this leave impressions that go beyond explanation. They stay with people long after they leave, and sometimes they're impossible to fully understand, which is exactly why this story continues to resonate, because it represents something larger than just one small town. It reflects a moment in history where priorities shifted dramatically, and where ordinary lives were affected in extraordinary ways, without warning, without full explanation, and without real closure. And that absence of closure is what makes it so unforgettable, because humans naturally search for answers, even when none are given. And when those answers don't come, the questions only grow stronger. That is what has kept this story alive for so many years. Not clarity, but curiosity. Not certainty, but possibility. And in many ways, that is what gives it its lasting power. Because some stories are not meant to be fully explained. Even after everything has been said, the silence still feels unfinished. Like a story paused in the middle, waiting for something that never comes. And maybe that's what makes this place so difficult to forget, because it doesn't offer closure. It leaves you searching for meaning. And in that search, the story continues to live on, passed from one person to another, generation after generation, not as a complete story, but as something still unfolding. And perhaps that's exactly how it was meant to remain, because some truths are never fully revealed, only partially understood, and in those fragments, people find their own interpretations. Some see a story of progress and national necessity, others see a story of loss, displacement, and unanswered questions, and both perspectives exist side by side and without resolution. Because history is rarely as simple as it first appears. And this place is a perfect example of that complexity, a place that exists both in memory and in mystery, and continues to quietly challenge those who try to understand it. Because the more you look, the more questions seem to appear, and the fewer clear answers you actually find. But maybe that's what keeps this story alive. Not the answers, but the search itself. Because as long as people keep asking questions, the story continues. And as long as it continues, it is never truly forgotten, even if the place itself no longer physically exists. Because memory can preserve what reality no longer holds, and stories can outlast even the places they come from. That is what gives this story its lasting power. Not just what happened, but what remains unknown. And in that unknown, the mystery continues to grow, quietly, steadily, and without ever fully resolving. Even after everything fades, something about this place still lingers quietly. Not something you can see, but something you can definitely feel. It's the feeling of something unfinished, something left behind without closure. And that feeling is what keeps people coming back to this story. Because unanswered questions often have a stronger pull than clear answers. They invite curiosity, speculation, and endless possibilities. And this story offers just enough information to keep that curiosity alive, but never enough to fully satisfy it. And maybe that's why it continues to be remembered, not as a clear chapter, but as an open-ended question. A question that still hasn't been fully answered, even after all this time. And one that may never be completely resolved, because some stories are meant to remain partially hidden, not out of coincidence, but by design. And that possibility adds another layer to an already complex story. A story shaped by decisions, secrecy, and time itself. And one that continues to exist somewhere between fact and mystery. Because even now, the full truth remains just out of reach. And perhaps that is exactly what keeps this story alive. Because as long as questions remain, the story is never truly over.